Hello, everyone.
Man, Adrian, that intro slaps. Like that's really well made.
Yeah, this is the reason why we came to, right?
Thank you.
Stream.
And
Thank you
the
so much
seconds
for
are
putting it together.
seconds are real, like counting and all of that, right?
Yeah.
It's like, cool.
Cool. So we have a guest today, and we have a topic. Dennis, can you describe the topic and introduce the guest, or the guest can?
Yes, let's do the guest first.
Yourself.
Mario, welcome. With us today is Mario Tomic. Mario, I'm just gonna put our name tags on screen real quick, just so I can do the introductions. Where are the name tags? Did we remove them, Adrian?
Don't know. Good question. They should be there. Show display names.
Oh,
There we go. Okay. So Mario, I invited Mario today to discuss this topic because Mario is a guest in our monthly coaching circles. It's a little small, cozy, private
right.
coaching call that we share with other consultants and coaches regarding positioning ourselves, how to sort of get better clients. And we ended up talking about this topic, and I just announced it, and I just checked what we were going to have this week, and it was about case studies. So I figured, okay, let's make it specific to startups.
Right. And
Mario, you're an FCTO, fractional CTO / CTO, consultant CTO. I think that's a fair description.
Yeah, it's kind of inflation of those names now, and kind of still figuring out like what do we do, right? How do we call it? But basically, they call us in when things go wrong, I guess, right? So now they keep calling us an amazing team. Everyone's happy, and they hug trees and ship daily, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, and I usually work, and that's my kind of specialization, that I work with non-technical founders that somehow grow to a situation that they cannot manage technical teams anymore, right? So, and that turns out to be like kind of sometimes weird scenarios. Sometimes companies like this one that we're going to talk about, they just grow rapidly and ended up having a mess that's still generating money and generating revenue and generating growth, right? And that's for me, it's like super interesting that you have, on LinkedIn, you have all those like amazing posts around, this is the right way to do it, this is the best way to do it, and then you have companies that do everything wrong, and they're still, because that traction is so strong, they're still kind of making it, right? But sometimes, that traction is just not enough, and they just need to fix things, and they keep fixing things all the time, right? So, and I ended up on one of those clients, and yeah, it was fun and rocky ride, kind of. So, but yeah, that's what I do in a minute.
Adrian, it's good to see you. What are you gonna pick today, Adrian? Something from your own company, mentoring? Where do you feel most? Where do you fix these sort of like organizational issues usually?
In my own company and the companies I'm working together with. So it's basically a mixture of that. Yeah. Well, it is not really like you fix them and then they are fixed. It is a little bit like it's a living thing. So new problems occur, new challenges, and you don't really see those things as a challenge in that very moment when it basically come into being the first time. So it's something, you can't fix everything anyway. You don't have the time to do that because you need to move on, and as soon as you move on, you create new problems, right? New challenges, new things to fix. But on some point in time, things get, let's say, or specific things get nasty and problematic. On some point, they even cost money or they destroy the culture. Maybe they destroy the UX, maybe the quality is not met, those kind of problems. And on some point, you see that one or many of those things needs to be addressed. And that is actually the moment when you need to start to do something. I think many think, hey, you can do a lot to prevent these things. That's right. You can do a lot to prevent, but you can't prevent everything. So, and my own experience as, let's say, the majority of my time in a traditional company, which wasn't tech driven by itself, but now being a tech driven founder myself, and working with like-minded companies, I have to say that you can't really prevent everything up front because software development is too fast-paced and you are too focused. As soon as you are in the development, you can say it as often as you want, you won't get out of the trenches. So as soon as you are part of the development cycle, you are in the trench. And it's, the trenches are moving fast. They are really moving fast. And oftentimes you have deliverables to do. So you have those milestones. I don't like deadlines, but milestones are definitely there. And as soon as you have those, you focus on these. That's actually what I see. It is always about those, right? Even though you can keep them quite loose, but you need to focus on them. You can't just say, hey, I'm just doing optimizations and those kind of things. And that is, I think, my hook for today. When I read the topic, so it's your topic, obviously, or your both topics, but my hook would be that the reality is often looking a little bit different than the actual ideas of what is the ideal when it comes to content you see on LinkedIn, for example. That's a good thing. So that's very often far away from what you actually see in reality and what you can implement. Yes. Yeah. And that is my hook. So I pass the word now to you. I hope that was interesting.
Yes, I would actually like to pass the word to our live audience. Today we're talking about 45, 50 minutes. We're about 10 minutes in. Maria, hello. So Maria and others who are with us, I think Kaloyan said he will be here today. If you have any questions, if you have examples from your work, working with smaller companies, startups, or working in one, what is that one thing that drove you nuts that it never get addressed, or like what grew, or what became a exponentially bigger problem as the company became more successful and bigger by headcount? Drop it in the comments. We'll definitely discuss it before we wrap up. And I suppose we can start. Mario, would you like to start with your example? I think you were the most excited to sort of share from this. I think yours is the most recent, at least fresh,
right,
in your mind.
Yeah, and that's definitely a thing. Like that's some oftentimes very different to theory. Like how they say that in theory, practice and theory should be the same, right? But in practice, they're not. So we get to see that all the time, right? So there was this client, and they have like very specific use case because they were deploying. Let's say they had 200 small clients, like single tenant application that they deliver with a different configuration. Let's say 200 clients, right? And they're all small, right? But all that combined was like serious traffic and serious money, right? So you would have a company that generates, I don't know, let's say 10 million in yearly revenue, but technologically they're kind of on a lower tier because that single unit of delivery, that single client was small, right? So kind of complexity required to handle it wasn't so big, right? But they had a lot of them. right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
And that's how managed to reach like serious scale without really having a proper or like well-defined technical team, right? So what it ended up, what I found there was there were like 5, 6, 7 developers, whatever, and there was like 1, 2 guys who kept kind of keys to the to knowledge. So there was like go-to guys, they knew everything, right? And those 2 guys, you couldn't really fire them. There was like that thing, like for
Mhm.
people you cannot fire because they know
They
everything,
were
right?
the process.
Right, exactly. Exactly, right. And that creates super weird dynamics with founders because founders knew they just couldn't fire those guys. At least they didn't understand how can they do it, right? And those 2 guys also knew, so there was like, I'm not gonna do what I don't want to do. So there was like extreme pressure from the founder side to get anything done outside of what those, like, let's say, key guys wanted to do, right? So there's like super unhealthy dynamics, and everything is always rushing, and there's always some stress because they need to produce that urgency to move things forward, right? Otherwise, well, like, what can you do, right? You cannot fire me. And I
How do they
realized,
receive you? Like, if you're brought on to solve that problem, how do they, like, did they see you as an enemy or potentially as a troublemaker?
right, like, founders kind of trying to escape that. They know they're trapped, right? What they didn't know, they also trapped by their own, they kind of produce trap they want to escape, right? So it's kind of,
Yeah. They
reflex,
perpetuate their
right?
state due to inaction.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But they know, like, oh, this thing is not right, and then, they wanted to fix all of that, right? Which is, of course, not possible because, like, very entrenched organization, they're there for years. It's not like startups. Startups are kind of cool because startups there's nothing there, so, like, they kind of virgin, right? So you can do whatever, right? But with the company, with processes, however broken they are, they kind of, engraved into DNA, whatever. So it's
People
very
get
hard,
used to them. Yeah.
right?
And the founder, if the cut is gonna be painful, like let's cut it out all in one go, right? So
Right.
we only go through the pain once.
So I was like, okay, how can I? And yeah, and obviously I wasn't really, welcome to the team. It was like, oh, like, why you here? Like, everything's great. Founders, they keep pushing us to do more, right? Whatever. So like, okay, cool. So what? And then I realized, okay, there's one stupid problem, which is it takes forever to deploy those, like, couple of hundred clients, right? So it's like, and what's even worse than that, it takes forever to roll back. That's bigger problem.
Something's wrong. Yeah.
Right, because they're like, oh, then, like, right. And obviously there weren't any tests or whatever, right? So what they have, and it was quite clever, they had like canary client. They just have a client who's like,
I've seen this.
deploy,
I've seen this
right,
before. This is not novel. I've seen this. Yeah. There's some
deploy this
internal
time
or
first,
dog food
right,
or dog fooding
right,
clients or
right,
like
right.
less important clients. Yeah.
And they even call it that way. They just call it canary, right? Canary, like, we deploy to canary. Okay, that means, like, this guy's received whatever is right, and then they would keep it like that for some time, then would roll it out massively, right? And I mean, it's kind of working, right? It's not like they like, because again, like, they scale to serious company, right? A company that has huge potential. They're like servicing, they're effectively doing SaaS for restaurant chains, right? And they have a lot of restaurant chains using this software for a lot of different things, for deliveries, for menu management, and so on. And they say, like, okay, cool. So what can I do? Like, I cannot, obviously, like external consultant, you cannot change the company. Maybe you cannot change the company. Like, I've kind of lost that hopes long time ago that you can change drastically. You can change something, and then that something will produce huge effect 3 years down the line. Maybe you're long gone by that, right? But you, as like, with your wisdom or whatever, you cannot do a lot, right? So it's like, okay, let's try to do one thing that shows both value and like, we can do it quickly, right? So let's fix that damn deploy process. Let's make it happen like half an hour instead of like 4 hours, right? And first step, like I can go on like this forever, but like just the first step was like, okay, let's put that thing into version control, because there was just one guy having scripts on servers, logging in there, hitting an enter, and then thing would go and like logs would go like in Matrix, just, and then okay, it's done, right? And the thing was like nobody knew how it works. There's that one guy, and so like getting approval. Okay, let's put that thing. Let's deploy that thing first. Let's put that thing into GitHub and make it deployable. Meaning like, okay, let's maintain that deployment process, that code, that scripts, not code, but scripts into one place. That was the first step. And it took me like a couple of weeks of calls and where we're going to put it, how we're going to deploy it, who is going to be what. But there's these different versions for different set of clients. And then like, oh, okay, this is going to be this is going to be much harder than I thought. So that's how it started. I know, like, I can go like this, we just make a break now or do,
yeah. Let's shuffle it a bit.
Right.
I mean, it's a great example because it segues a bit into my situation as well. I had a client where I was sort of approached, like I had that same good cop, bad cop mentality. You said you work with the founder, but the team didn't really welcome you. Like,
right.
Like I had that for most of my team coaching clients. I have the same situation of, why are you here? Everything's okay. But then I look at the metrics of the company and it's like, okay, there's this huge risk factor. You have a lot of bugs. There's this constant pressure. Nothing gets deployed on time. Deployment takes forever. But please, Dennis, why are you here? Everything's fine.
Right. Everything's amazing. Yeah.
So I do get that a lot, right? Because there's the team is usually so busy or so under pressure that they sort of have to accept in their mind that things have to be okay the way they are, because if they're not, I'm gonna go crazy. But if I allow myself to think that things are not okay right now, I will go crazy, because they're just under so much pressure. So that creates a lot of artificial resistance when you actually come in to help. So that is one of the main things I deal with, and my example does apply to that. I'm just gonna check the comments. Krishna is mentioning Krishna Prasad mentions not having a defined purpose or direction for your software or skills. Yeah, that's definitely an issue. And I do believe you have a little bit of a delay, so you might be a few minutes behind, because that's from my question, right? Yeah, the canary, Kalian said, the early adopter client, for to the example of your canary types of clients. Maria mentions, Tech Pros told me that one of the problems is when the company scales and hires more people and creates more problems in communication between people. Yeah, I always...
this is what Maria sent me for
this is great. Yeah, so for those who are listening, Adrian is showing shapes on the screen which show the number of diagonals in that shape. So a triangle has no diagonals, but it's like 3 people, there's like 3 different conversations going on with 3 people. 4 people can have 6 different conversations. And there's even more complex when you count the group meetings as well, not just the dialogues. So this is the amount of unique combinations that you can have dialogues, but you can also have, 4 people can have a 2-person meeting, a 3-person meeting, a 4-person meeting. So all of these numbers are actually underestimations, which makes the whole situation worse. I would also advise, never growing your startup very fast if what you're solving is, our engineers are very slow, right? So if you want more software rollout, or in parallel, multiple projects running in parallel, unless you've done the kind of work that Mario mentions, it's definitely going to be a bad idea if you're just going to scale a bad process up exponentially. Kaloyan mentions the Yogi Berra truism. In theory, there is no difference between theory and practice. In practice, there is. I love that one. Thank you. Thank you, Kaloyan. Krishna had a very... you are live. The vast number of programming languages, frameworks, and tools can make it hard to decide where to focus. Interesting. Seems a bit off topic for me, but let's see. So the example I want to mention really ties in well with what you said with, you know, why you hear everything is fine, is that the team, there was that generally lack of psychological safety, right? So when there's low PS, PS being shortened from psychological safety, and for the next 10 minutes, a low PS situation is very good at creating the illusion that everything is okay. So that is the first barrier. There is an illusion that everything is okay. And then you sort of have to reach through that and get them to see the light, essentially. Well, to accept how things really are. And with this client, what I did, I just brought in the developers to the product meetings, to the stakeholder meetings, and I just told them, hey, look, just shadow this. Like, don't talk. When you talk to them, you talk engineer to customer. That's not the issue. Just look at them having a conversation business to business and see what they obsess about. So I brought them in and just had them shadowed. I had the CTO talk to the product owner, I had the stakeholders, the CMO talk to the COO, the CTO, and they watched that and they were like, oh my God, they're complaining. Like, they're complaining about completely different things than what we have prioritized in our sprints. Plus, I can't even get to our sprints because I'm so busy bogged down on these bugs. Right? So I had a typical issue of the team brings me in to, hey, we have so many bugs, we need to do something, we need to introduce something, automate deploys, tests, upskill the team a little bit, offer them opportunities to learn and grow so that we can, actually promote them into a realistic role rather than just giving them a reward for tenure. And the biggest issue is they were just too busy. They were just too busy fighting fires. And it's been going on for so long that there was a backlog behind the backlog, and then they had, like,
but they were willing. You're saying they were willing, but too busy.
Yeah, so they were willing, but then, like, the intensity would increase during the week. It's like Monday was okay, and then it was okay, and then on Wednesday, the reality kicked in, and then on Friday it was like, okay, enough for this week, and then on Monday it was okay again, right? So they just kept having this sort of artificial sort of wave to the intensity of how they worked, depending on how their planning cycles went, because that's when they had their main sprint meeting or a sort of a roadmap correction meeting, right? So they had a roadmap planning meeting, a correction meeting, a sprint meeting, a sprint planning meeting. So on the day when they were making the plan, they were really calm, and then reality hit them in the face sort of midweek, and then their appetite sort of diminished towards the end of the week. And I told them that, hey, by the way, I know that you brought me in to sort of solve all these problems, but it seems we can only really do work on Mondays. Right? Because otherwise you're not present anymore.
This is this typical vision problem. You have on Monday, you start fresh. Everyone does have this vision, right? You take a look, what we're going to do this week. What is a deliverable? What do we try to do? Everyone is open-minded. Everyone is fresh, and it goes this. We have Wednesday. We have, we need to get this done. Oh, it's close. Oh, actually, we haven't got it done, right? And then if you are lucky, you start into the next week like this, and if you are unlucky, you already start like this because you have things not done. And that is the typical problem of already it is not how you fix things, it is in my opinion how you get things done. And this is the problem. You have planned things, you have most often promised things to whoever stakeholder or user out there, and then you were basically failing to deliver because you were committing to a deadline, which is which you can't basically predict, because we are in a development environment, and development is not really predictable in that position, right? And that is one of these problems. And that's my
that's funny. Tip. That's funny because
but my best tip here is actually to speak with the stakeholders and tell them that this is not working, because whatever you try, you won't fix it, because you need to fix something which is in the past. So you already have the next deliverable, and the typical thing is to do over hours, to work weekends, and this is the beginning of the end of the culture. And the first people will already silent quitting, especially in current generations. This organization had this problem.
Like there was silent quitting going on, and this was like the third generation that's sort of suffering from this kind of disillusionment. So that was actually my solution. We sort of attacked it from two directions. One direction, I worked with the team directly, and I just told them, look, like, I just kept having conversations with them where I asked them, like, what are the priorities? Like, what is the team's priority and what is your priority? And when I had that meeting with like 7 people, I got different answers for all different for both questions. So we just kept having this for like weeks on end until everybody started seeing what the actual priorities are, not just what the current fire they're fighting is. So that was from the team level. That was really frustrating because it felt like therapy. But with the stakeholders, it was a bit easier. And this is to your point, Adrian, when you said it is not predictable. But that's just the upside. The upside is not predictable, right? So it's a bet, and it can be good or bad, right? You can win or lose the hand, if I'm using poker terminologies. But in this case, because there was a lot of depth or technical depth, the team was essentially stuck regarding product engineering because there were so much bugs coming in from the past sprints, is that I could actually predict with a very high degree of certainty that they are going to fail. Right? So there was a very high chance that they're going to land on the downside because their chance of being accurate and successful was so low. So it's not to say that it's not predictable. It's just that the upside was not predictable, but the downside was predictable. Right?
Yeah, of course. It is predictable that you fail. Yeah, you're prone
So what
to
I got
fail.
them to do is I asked them, and this is with the CTO and with one of the C levels, was that, hey, you have a hugely rigorous process, a lot of documentation. Like, why are you following this process? Oh, because this is what we need to do to, deliver high quality products. Well, is it working? It's like, yes, in theory, but in practice we have some minor issues. And I told them, look, in practice, I can show you data that tells you exactly where you're gonna land. And you're gonna land exactly 4 months late. We know that now. So if what you're saying is true, then this thing should have been done last Friday. And progress on it right now is 20%. Right? So I asked them to just, when we're making the plan, I just want a minor checkpoint, like a sanity checkpoint on Wednesday. If Wednesday looks like the week is going according to plan, no problem. You're right. But if on Wednesday we can see that the plan for the next 2 weeks is not going according to plan, we cancel everything. And we stop. And we meet the leaders, we meet and we discuss what went wrong. Because if something can go wrong in the first 3 days of a week, then there's no point planning a 3-month roadmap. And if this is constantly happening, then we're wasting a lot of time creating wishful fairy tales about the future that then end up costing the company a lot of money. Right? So all I introduced was a stop loss. I said, if you're right, nobody's going to press this button. If I'm right, I want us to stop the project, not hope that it'll magically fix itself. Because in order for it to magically fix itself on a downturn, you need to show evidence of being hyper-productive on some days to just come back to baseline. And that's not the reality. And then we agreed to do that. And then the CTO called me up. I love this story because it's always that fear of, Dennis, I think it's happening. It's like, what? It's like, yeah, like, according to what you said, we made no progress in the last 4 days, on the 2-week sprint. Okay, what does that tell you? Well, I think we can still fix it, but and then that whole thing kicked in. It's like, I think we can still fix it, and I think, well, maybe. I mean, if we move this and that, I'm like, no, like it's.
This is all driven by fear of change, because
exactly
you
don't
want to change in that moment.
Yeah. When we were clear-minded, when we were sort of calm on that Monday, we said, no, if this happens, we cancel it. We cancel it and escalate. And he was like,
yeah, because the change is in the future. So we Our subconscious mind doesn't produce as much resistance. But in that moment when we should do this, the resistance is highest. So it will tell you everything, anything to get you away from the change. Suddenly, all that is fine again. And even the CTO of a company will pursue and persuade others. So that you actually stay with what you have and retry, and we can do that. And that is actually one of the worst things you can do, because you basically fool yourself, your team, and the entire organization in the same way when you actually failed. And that was in the very beginning. That is where the promises were made, when the big project plan was made, when the milestones, the budget was defined, everything was defined, but no one knew what will happen in the next 2 weeks. But we had already a plan for 6 months, right?
Absolutely.
Budget, everything allocated. There's no more budget you need to get with that. And it must be done until then, because so many others are already reliant on that very specific date. Those kind of problems are severe. In most cases, you don't, especially those things like, but we have already a marketing team which is preparing. No, that is one of the biggest mistakes now from the strategic area.
It's all that.
Don't do that if you don't have something to prepare for. Don't do that. It is not working like that. The world is working differently.
I think in software abstraction, in just purely tactical coding, this is called speculative generality, or is it speculative? It's a generality. Is it that? Yeah, speculative generality. Where you say, "Oh, I'm gonna add this to the plan. Well, because what if this happens? Or I'm gonna add this to the code base because I think we'll need this, or I'll probably need this feature because I can predict a scenario where a user comes in and complains about it."
That's a lot of fallacy and biases there. But go ahead, Naya.
Is it because like they're just overpromise? Because what you guys saying, they just keep over-promising, which I see so often, right? And that's happening,
right? They're over-promising, everybody is well-meaning. In that situation, I got to analyze the interactions, and one of the issues was that the founder, the CEO, was very assertive, right? So they could dominate the room. They're a very good salesman. And one of the issues was that, to a certain degree, a lot of these decisions ended up being bad decisions. And the bad decisions ended up putting a lot of pressure on operations and the developers, because there were bugs, there were data problems, that multiple hundreds of tenants. Imagine this was a SaaS company. Imagine scaling it up to thousands or 10,000s, and then just having exactly those kinds of problems. And the problem became that, when you're challenging the ideas, you ask them, well, what data do you have to support this argument? Because the team is so slow, it takes months to produce data. So people go double down on this speculation. It's I would do continuous delivery and just try it, but it takes 2 months to roll out anything trivial with the engineering team. So it might as well count, and it might as well be my idea if I'm gonna, carry the risk, right? So a lot of the high-level decisions were made in advance by high-level people, and it's very difficult to get out of that.
And there's another point to that. So that is what I know from many meetings with C-suite stakeholders, investors, and high-level clients. When you are in those meetings in the very beginning, it feels a little bit like what we put on the board will happen. So this is this. Everyone feels as powerful as that. We're decision makers here. Exactly. So we're going and we say this will happen, and because there is now a post-it on the board, it will happen. And so that. Or everyone thinks, okay, everything we put on the board now will happen. That is a fallacy. It won't. And the more you put on the board, the less likely it will become. And it is basically the very opposite of agile. Because that is basically, you try to implement waterfall process here. So you define especially the typical Gantt diagrams with a critical path. You define those, and then you see the whole diagram doesn't work out because the beginning is already failing. And that is, I think, the biggest problem and the biggest fallacy we have in software development, because basically it is, I would say, in 8 or 9 out of 10 companies, you have this exact problem.
Yes.
And that's
Yes.
back to this diagram, because most of the companies, the diagram Maria sent with the complexity, most of the companies have a high complexity, and they simply don't realize what's going on. So people try to enforce things, overrule things, in order to get things into being. So that is a human natural thing of, hey, we are willing to do that, but we can't. But the problem is that the engineers are the people who suffer from that.
Yeah. I managed to do one workshop with them like half a year in. I said, let's do like an experiment. Let's get the key stakeholders, the key product people, and the key engineers into a single room, and let's try to just plan a week as if nothing was on the roadmap. And it was one of the best conversations that they ever had. You know, everybody was mind blown that, oh my God, like finally I feel like you guys get me, that I don't need to have deadlines because you understand perfectly what needs to be built, right? Because when you take the pressure away, they were like, what are we building? This, why this? Do we have to build it? Like, is it really that important? It's like, yeah, it's really that important. Why? Show me this. And then it's like, hey guys, but I have this other thing coming on. Okay, so we have 2 things, not more. And then you put the team into action, and it's like, oh, okay, so we're doing this. Oh, we found this problem. That's unimportant. We have these 2 things. We can't focus. Either we need to have a meeting to take something off, or we need to finish this. And the team worked amazingly for a week. You know, and that the team was capable of doing that. It's just that the pressure, any kind of organization, you put them under pressure. Engineers say, well, I would, but you know, product and my bosses say, yeah, we would, but you know, engineering, like they're really slow. And then operations say, oh yeah, we would do this, but you know, product and operations, like they're not. And then marketing says, oh yeah, we would do this, but you know how the engineers are. And it just becomes this finger pointing problem, right? So the organization becomes so complex that nobody sees beyond like 2 jumps in communication. And that becomes an enormously difficult problem, especially if the departments are set up in such a way that they reinforce like this lack of visibility, this sort of shallow range. I, as a consultant, have like a unique perspective, right? Because I can just go and talk to anybody and like zoom out and zoom in, then present the situation to them. What ended up working really well for them is just have a reality check of, hey guys, I know the bugs are a problem, but you spend too much time triaging and you spend too much time bug fixing. Like, yes, if you treat it like an emergency for the client and you need to go fix something, sure. But unless you're actually addressing the root cause, which is the software system that has caused the inaccuracies, you're wasting your time. Because the problems pile up faster than you can solve them. And in your free time, you create new software with that same standard. So it'll have exactly the same problems in 3 months. Right? So as much as it is benevolent and well-meaning, you're wasting your time. Because you're not keeping up with, this is now Little's law. You're not keeping the queue. If there's a queue, and your drain is not keeping up with how fast the queue is being filled. So we need to stop doing the drainage.
Yep.
And then we need to stop doing the fill up, and we need to do some drastic measures like clearing the backlog, like saying, hey, these issues are so old, we're just going to close them. And so that you guys can relax, calm down, so that we can actually think and commit to a plan for more than a week, for more than a few days, ideally. And that got the ball rolling. But it took me, like 3-4 months of small wins, working very intimately with the team, with the stakeholders, with the leaders, just to build up trust, to get to them, even to have this meeting, to essentially face their demons. But it ended up being a very good relationship with the team and the leaders. Marketing and the stakeholders were a bit ruffled by the whole experience, because it did take a lot of saying no, which they didn't
get
want.
more of the stuff, right? They get less of the stuff, but they kind of realize that those less of the stuff are kind of better for them long term, because
there's no upside, right? So it sucks. Right. It sucks either way, right? So the problem is you're on that, Sander Hugendorn has this great diagram where technical depth is when I have productivity and a little bit of depth, and then as time goes on, the productivity goes down and the depth goes up. Like goes negative. You have this like little sliding window below zero. And he described that technical depth is when there's only bug fixing.
Yeah.
Like you're not producing any new features. There's just bug fixing.
Stalled process.
It just stalled. You're not moving anywhere. And if you stop bug fixing, you're actually moving backwards. You're just creating liabilities, issues, legal issues, data issues, corruption issues, downtime. So it's actually worse than calling bankruptcy, right? So you're just actively investing money to not go
move,
bankrupt.
right?
Yeah, and it's really dangerous. He calls this situation technical death. And the problem is that when you're in this situation, all options suck. So there's no upside, right? There's only downside. And what we're doing, and I come in and I imagine you have this similar experience with considering what you discussed, is our role is to make the downside smaller. Is to make the downside less intense, to get it closer to zero. And that usually goes unappreciated. But then if you stick with it long enough and you start early enough, you can actually come above, the zero line, and then the real productivity kicks in.
I think there's a huge difference. There's a huge difference with like on product teams and client teams, right? When you have like client-facing companies, let's say agencies or like enterprise clients, they having, their clients, they need to deploy new version of Microsoft Dynamics, whatever, by that deadline, whatever. So that creates that kind of SaaS teams are kind of easier, I would say, because for them, like profitable SaaS companies have runway forever, right? So it's kind of time is forever for them, right? They don't have deadline per se, right? They might have competitors and they might be chasing whatever, but they're just working with that one thing, and that one thing always can be pushed to the next sprint or to next quarter or year or whatever. But when you have clients and to come back to this point of budgets, right? Budgets and deadlines are reality of, and I don't necessarily like this approach of, oh well, we don't know how much it's gonna take, we don't know, like we want to be agile. So agile kind of doesn't really, agile works for developers, but doesn't work really for like CEOs and owners and founders, right? Because they understand that idea of, well, okay, cool, but how much time is gonna take and how much is gonna cost, right? And we as industry need to be able to have that conversation, right?
That was a very abrupt stop, and I'm not sure if okay. Emergency? We still can't hear you, but you're on a call. Okay. Adrian, since Mario is dealing apparently with a phone call, Adrian, what is your example?
There were many, but there was a long discussion. Example, I would like to respond to that, especially to the SaaS versus agency company. That's one of my topics, actually. So you have deadlines in both, I would say, but basically agency work is a deadline war, because I don't know agency work where there is no deadline, because it's always the fear of, hey, what I do get for my money. That's one of the problems with agency work. But in SaaS work, you have it yourself, or you create it yourself, because you actually, in order to stay competitive, you make promises. You tell people that you have things, or you will have things. And those kind of things, it's very bad for you if you don't deliver multiple times in a row. That can actually kick you out, or especially when you start a SaaS product. The very first clients count, and the trust and the confidence and the credibility as well. So you have those as well, but they can be treated as milestones, not as deadlines. But you have those goals as well. Yeah.
And your experience is primarily in the German market, and they can be very pedantic regarding legal guarantees, right? So even if you have an agile project, like what is the legal guarantee? Because Germany does have a very good
it is very absurd how much people actually write down that the hours they actually work on
Yeah.
things,
Yeah.
and discuss the hours like we're discussing in Germany 15 minutes here and there. Be discussing for half an hour about if we now basically bill 15 minutes. It's a little bit stupid, but yes, that's one of those things.
Yeah, it's just a German thing. You know,
That's
I don't
German,
have this
yeah.
for anybody else. Just Germany. I mean, the DACH region in general. Regarding what Mario said as well, I just want to give a rebuttal. I don't like this sort of conflation of agile means we have no plans. What I like to bring it to is that from a sales perspective, continuous delivery or sort of very much a team engineering driven effort that is, let's say, attempting to be agile is scoping last, right? So it is pricing outcomes and scoping last, and this is an impossible combination if you're pricing the work, the scope, and you want to scope last, because then nobody knows what it costs. Then we can set a deadline, but we don't know what it costs, and that's silly. So what I found works really well is to just teach the engineering teams, the engineers, how to have a more sales-driven conversation when it comes to planning. You know, to have this situation of, hey, they want to know the deadline. And I would always encourage them, well, then we'll just have them set the deadline. Yeah, I would always come to engineering teams and say, just ask them. It's like, hey, if this takes 3 months, is that too long? And usually stakeholders will say, yeah, like, that's absolutely too long. I need it by, okay, go with their answer. And then tell them, like, there is very little I can do in this amount of time. What is of utmost importance? What definitely cannot be missing?
I think that makes sense. Then it comes to like managing kind of expectations, but like we cannot just drop time and money, you know.
No, time and money needs to be there.
Like,
but I'm saying, like, the thing that is dynamic should be the scope, as in what went into the project, what features did you get out, right? So because you want to have a conversations about we have a list that says, we have a document that says, here's 47 features and we need all of them. And the scope last mentality is, okay, so we will start with a list of 47 things, and by the end of this meeting, we will have 47 things split into 2 categories. Must have, that we definitely will have until the end of the deadline, and the nice to haves. And there's no in between. And the must haves have to be less than 10% of the list, or less than 5% of the list. So it's like this, it's 10-90. Because then if you get the must haves before the end of the deadline, well, then we still have budget left over to add something to the list. But if you're wrong, I can't take away stuff and give you the money back, right? Or give you the time back. Like, I can't take the feature out and give you the money and the time back. So there has to be an extremely conservative list. And usually when I shadow these kinds of meetings and then sort of help them reframe the conversation, like, just having had that conversation it just fixes, I think, like 90% of the problems it just fixes. Because you have clear expectations of, oh, actually, yeah, you're right. Like the engineers will get distracted and something will go wrong. So if it's just these 5 features out of these 40, it's like, those 5 are like what I really care about. Like, does payment work? Can I find it on the marketing page? Does SEO work? Can I sell something? Can I talk to my client? That's enough. And then the rest we'll figure out in operations and various iterations, or I'll hire another agency to take care of any kind of work that got left over. That is then a healthy conversation. That is then a budgeting conversation that is about, yeah, you're right. Like, if things go wrong, there's no way back. But if you're right and we're conservative, then we have a lot of wiggle room to actually solve those minute issues, which are then smaller in intensity, rather than having this whole, disaster reaction that sort of gives people, stomach cancer from, oh, we promised, but we didn't, and now the marketing team, and then the branding team, and then now I have the designer waiting, and somebody's making a video clip, and now they can't do their job. And it's just, crazy. Okay, rant off.
Good. I think we are going to the finish line right now.
Yeah.
Good. So for the audience, thank you for the comments. That was great. Okay, some last words, Mario. What do you think? So as a wrap up, what is your takeaway for others for this session? So what would you recommend as one of the tips for especially startups and people who have that problem, what they can do as a first step, right, to start fixing that?
Right. Yeah. So I mean, we keep just talking about that, right? And it's always the same thing. Like it's always that thing that we're similar to those like weather guys. We can understand what will happen in a week, but like we have no idea what will happen in 3 months, right?
Mhm.
So we kind of have that clarity on a shorter period of time. And when you talk with the guys on Monday, I think they're kind of okay if they're not threatened by management or by stakeholders. If they don't like have equal kind of conversation to them, they kind of can say what they can do by Friday. The problem is
Mhm.
what they cannot say what can they do like by end of February. Right, that's the problem, right? And like the more conversation we have around, okay, what we realistically can do by Friday, that will remove a lot of our problems. By Friday, we kind of can manage, but like by in 2 months, that's almost impossible, right? And
Mhm.
maybe having from Monday to Friday, and just having like small wins along the way, that's probably what make a difference. So like long plans, yeah, I mean you can just put them on the wall and laugh at them in 2 months, right? But the
Mhm.
week time, I think we kind of can, well, depending on the team. But weeks, I'm kind of able to manage, but like
Mhm.
months, much harder. Months,
Yeah.
like whatever, right? So I think that's shortening time frame and just focus on that, like
Yeah.
because in a week you can do very little, right? And
Mhm.
then very little needs focus, and
Yeah.
then like if you just look
Yeah.
at that one little thing,
And you will
it's
say
gonna
that,
happen.
oh, I won't do it because I can't make a huge impact in a week. So then it never gets done, and then
Right,
that
and
compounding interest never really gets rolling, never really gets
yeah.
started.
So yeah, that's probably yeah.
What would you advise, Adrian?
I would advise to understand what the problem is. So we always try to speak primarily about, hey, how we can fix things, right? But oftentimes we miss that if we don't understand what the root cause was,
Yeah.
then we aren't able to really fix it. And the problem is always somewhere in the past done by ourselves. So it is very unlikely that's an environmental problem or
Yeah.
some higher cause or some higher force. Can happen. It hasn't. It happened already, but it is in most of the cases, especially when we're talking about weeks and months, it is, especially when it's recurring, it is our problem. And we need to understand that. And it's not the problems of the developers, it's not the problems of the business, it's a problem of the company itself. So the company does do something wrong with the strategy. And that's how it
Yeah.
starts. And we often try to fix it by getting someone in and this person shall just fix it. And I always tell, especially to coaches, that basically when I coach coaches, that coaches should focus on especially those kind of things. So of course it's nice to say, hey, let's introduce continuous delivery. I show you how to set
Yeah.
up a CI/CD pipeline, but that is not a fix. As you said during this call we had today, it is not really possible to actually implement a CI/CD pipeline for a continuous delivery process if you actually wait for ages to get things done.
Yeah.
And you need to ask yourself, why is that the case? So why are you still basically fixing bugs and having at the same moment new features and new milestones, and it is always clashing, it is always in a confrontation mode right now. Why do we have this? It is not only because the developers are slow, and what is the reason why the developers getting slower and slower, right? So that there must be another reason, and people need to find this reason. And this is what I call removing the disconnect between business and development. Because as soon as development and business, especially business, does understand this kind of problem field, then business can change something. And the change is actually removing the deadlines as good as possible and making clear that we are not wizards as developers. We are just people, just humans, and we need to get one thing after the other, and we will see where we come out. And we can't just bend reality by putting some post-its on a board, as I said in the beginning. It's not possible. That is what I recommend doing.
What I would recommend to echo it, both of your statements that I find works well. This is not theoretical, this is not from a book, but I just find this works very well, especially with startup scale-ups, early stage companies that have sort of been around for a few years, is to keep instilling with leadership, especially CTOs, VPs, is to keep instilling this idea of urgency to make the product better.
Yeah.
Right. So that what can we do? But again, to combine both timelines, right? So the one that Mario mentioned, the months, the roadmaps, and what's happening this week, right? So I always come back to this idea of continuous delivery done well means that there is something we're doing this week, definitely doing this week, that will make the product a lot better 6 months from now. And to instill a sense of urgency of, hey, like we have no strategy here that would connect improvement done this week to a better outcome 3 months from now, 6 months from now, right? So and maybe stakeholders will disagree on which product that laser focus should go to. Maybe that's the core issue. Maybe there's 7 different product lines and 6 of them are failing, and nobody wants to cut off 3 to claw back some time, to claw back some focus. Or when presented with this question, perhaps product doesn't want to admit that, these were experiments and we don't want to call them failures because it's going to demotivate people. We're just going to run another experiment to see if there's actually, if this is baseline, if there's anything else that we can do to improve this. But to actually give power back to the engineers and say, hey, what are you guys doing this week to make sure that this product is a lot better 6 months from now, so that the chances of this product making a lot of revenue are higher 6 months from now, that NPS scores can be higher, that revenue can be higher. Because if you're not asking that question, then you're actually putting a cap on the product. It won't improve past a certain sort of homeostasis. And maybe you're not there yet, and you might be deluded in thinking that, revenue is increasing, but that's just because you didn't reach that very low ceiling yet. And growth is so slow that you think that this is going to go on forever. But it's just going to plateau out, and the company will stagnate. Mm-hmm. It's this sort of do something this week that will make big impact 3 months from now, 6 months from now. To have everybody think along those lines, I think is a very healthy sort of combination of action and vision. That should be in one mind. It should be on one mind. It shouldn't be a group effort to have you think about today, you think about next week, and then the other person across the department, they think about the next year. So that it's always within the same skull. It's always the one brain, connecting back together divorced product from engineering. That'll be my advice. So live audience, thank you so much. Sanjeev, you're becoming a regular. I see you. I've seen you now on 3 consecutive episodes. So thank you so much for being with us. Maria, thank you for being with us once more. Kaloyan, Krishna, Vladan, hello. I think Vladan was about to say hi, but then he deployed something to production. All right, gentlemen, it's been a pleasure.
Likewise.
Thank you.
Any suggestions for outros? Otherwise, I'll put on some lovely elevator music and sign us off.
No, not for me.
No. Thank you.
See you next time. Bye-bye.
See you next time. Thank you, Mario. Mario, if you want to drop your contact in the comments or the LinkedIn post I'm about to post so people can find you, that would be great.
Sounds good. Thank you.
All right. Cueing elevator music, and see you all next time.
Bye-bye.